Hey you guys, thanks so much for joining me over here in Lightroom. I am so excited to show you this element of the behind the scenes. I love the editing process, and so far you've seen the cameras that we have used, the lenses that we used for Patty and Jason's shoot, and the behind the scenes of the actual shoot with our GoPro Hero 9. So this is where I feel like a lot of the magic happens. I do want to start by sharing with you guys that I typically shoot at 10,000 Kelvin like 100% of the time. That is a personal preference. That is because I feel like personally it is easier to make an image go from warmer to cooler than shoot cooler and add warmth. And since we just switched to the Nikon Z6 II, we are still figuring out our settings. This is actually only my second photo shoot with the Z6, so kind of just relearning the color calibration, what it looks like, how the lenses work with it. I just started using my 50mm again. So anyway, typically I'll shoot at 10,000 Kelvin, and then I create actions based on that. I typically change up the actions either every year or every season sometime. So right now we're in winter in Colorado, so I'm gonna edit just a little differently for winter sessions because I don't want the snow to be blue, but I don't want it to be yellow. I want it to be white. And I want my whites to be white, my darks to be dark. Typically for summer or fall, I might use a little different editing style, but they all look consistent. So I'm going to show you guys a few different options. One of them is going to be just clicking on one of these actions that I have already created just to show you how actions work and that you always have to do some sort of work with an action, just a little bit of tweaking. But then I'm also going to show you start to finish how I would edit an image if I didn't have an action. I'll show you some of my favorite tools, some of the neat little tricks that help really bring an image to life and really help you hone in on that color correction and getting skin tones proper and all that fun stuff. Real quick, I want to show you, I have 5 images that I pre-selected. I actually typically use Photo Mechanic to do all my culling. I absolutely love Photo Mechanic. I'll put a link in the comments so that you can very easily access it. But for this photo's sake, for this video's sake, I just went ahead and grabbed 5 images with 3 different backdrops that I wanted to show you. So this was earlier in the session. These 2 are in the same spot, same backdrop. Then we moved into the trees and I have the sun directly behind them. Then we moved out into our meadow where we have those big, beautiful mountain backdrops and one of Harry. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started here with this beautiful shot of Patty and Jason. And I'm actually going to use one of our actions. You can see that whenever you hover over the image, it's going to give you a preview of what your photo is going to look like. I actually really love this one, the Winter Sunset 2021. You'll see I have a few different golden winter sunset. That one's a little yellow. This sunset is just slightly different. The shadows are a little more exposed, but I really dig where this winter sunset is starting. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and that is going to activate it on the photo. It's not going to change it. There's not a whole lot that I want to change here. The main thing I think is I want to bring up their shadows a little bit, and I'm not super in love with the green hue on Jason's face. This is something that just after editing thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of photos, you kind of start to pick up on. Typically for Nikon, we end up having to adjust the warmth of our images, and for Canon users, you typically end up having to adjust the tint more. I have noticed that whenever we've had second shooters who shoot Canon and we shoot Nikon, the edits are just completely different. So that's just one thing to note. However, for this image, I am gonna add a little bit of the magenta back in just to get rid of that green off of Jason's face. Honestly, guys, I really love this image. I feel like the contrast might be a little bit, so instead of doing contrast, I very rarely touch contrast. I'm gonna actually put that back to 0 by double clicking. Instead of using contrast, I love to use the Haze tool. Haze is my favorite. You guys will see this with the start to finish image that we'll edit here in just a few minutes. But since the Haze is already set, I'm just gonna adjust the blacks a little bit, and truthfully, I love this shot. So this is the TJS Winter Sunset 2021 with a few minor adjustments. Now, a fun little trick in Lightroom, if you don't know this, if you are on a Mac, you can hit Command C, and that is to copy, or you can come up here go File, or sorry, Edit, Copy. I know the shortcut's way too much. Copy, you can copy all these settings so that if you have an image with the same background, go to Edit, Paste, and it's going to paste those same settings onto this image. That's pretty dang near perfect. I will probably brighten up the exposure just a little bit, and voila, all done. Those two are done. We're going to move over into the trees, and this is where I'm going to show you a start to finish edit. So whenever you crop, you typically do not want to crop at a joint, because if you're at a joint, your brain cannot put together that there is a leg at the end of that. But if you crop in the middle of, like, say, shins or shoulder, you know, forearm, thigh as opposed to the knee, your body can, or your brain can finish understanding, or start to understand that there is a leg at the end of that shin. But again, if you cut it at the joint, your brain has a hard time kind of putting that together. So I don't like this dirt over here, so I'm just going to crop in. Also, the rule of thirds. Most of the time, you're going to want your subjects either at this cross section, these cross sections, or these cross sections. Right now, they're kind of funny in the middle, off to the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag this so that Jason and Patty are, or at least Jason is at that cross section. If I wanted to, I could totally center them. Maybe I'll do that actually. I'm going to go ahead and totally center them instead of having it at the cross, because I do like having this greenery and the trees. Enter. So start to finish, we are going to work on this image together. You can see that I put the sun behind them. Between them and me, that sun is at 12 o'clock. Whenever you are talking about lighting and photography, it starts at 12. Based on where you are standing and the direction you are looking. So the sun is at 12 o'clock. This is right about at sunset in the mountains. And so we have what's called blue hour. So this is at golden hour. Blue hour is whenever the sun sets behind the mountains. And we actually have quite a bit of time left to shoot after the sun sets behind the mountains. I'd say 20 to 40 minutes, depending on what time of the year it is. And that is what's called blue hour. And we get these beautiful blue colors. We just bump up our ISO, and it's pretty easy to shoot during blue hour. But we're at golden hour, sun's at 12 o'clock. I love the sun behind them, but I'm gonna try to bring that out just a little more, and the warmth. So you can see this is still a pretty warm image. My Kelvin was still set at 6650, which is still pretty warm, but again, I'm used to shooting at 10,000 Kelvin. So I'm still gonna bump up the warmth a little bit. Before I do that though, I'm gonna go over to exposure. I do shoot darker. I love shooting darker. It allows me to save a lot more detail in the image. And again, I feel like it's easier to brighten an image than to make it darker in post-processing. I'll mess with the exposure just a little bit, but before I get too crazy, I'm actually gonna come down here and work on my highlights. Now you can use this graph up here. I kind of ignore it. I just go based on what I think looks right. So I'm going to bring up some whites. I'm going to bring my blacks down. I already know that I like my blacks around -20. Again, I like my blacks to be black, my whites to be white. I don't like the grayscale stuff. I don't like the, you know, just not having a true to life look. But that is totally personal. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to bump up my whites. This is one of my favorite tools. You can see if you go really bright, it's like super overexposed, but I'm going to stick around 20 as well, or just to balance out the -20 with the blacks. Now we're going to come down here to the Dehaze tool. I love the Dehaze tool. It's one of my favorite tools. Here is what contrast looks like. Let's go up, you know, maybe 35 in contrast. You can see how it adds some contrast, but you can tell it's been edited. Double click, it's going to go back to 0. I'm going to come down here and do the dehaze and do the same. I'm going to come up to maybe 25 actually, and you can't tell that it's actually been edited near as much. The dehaze tool I just prefer, especially at sunset, because it really gives you that beautiful glow. It really just makes the image pop more than the contrast does. I like to bump up my clarity just a little bit, not for any reason in particular, but I like to bump it up. So this is looking pretty good. I'm gonna bump up my exposure now that I've got a lot of my general settings done. I'm gonna bump it up a little bit. I will probably change that after a little while. I'm also gonna bring my shadows down. As you can see, the trees back here are, they're properly exposed, but just to make Patty and Jason pop a little more, I'm gonna bring those shadows down. -15. Now, guys, these are some of my favorite tools down here. The HSL and color section and the color grading, which I believe is in the newest version of Lightroom. Sorry, the Lightroom Classic. We just updated our Lightroom Classic, and this was one of the new features, and I am #obsessed with it. So one of the first things that I want to do, their faces are not red, but say it was a really cold day in the mountains, their faces were red. This is a great opportunity to come in and play with the saturation of the red. Obviously, if I bring it down, they look dead and kind of sickly, but I'm going to leave it at 0 for now. But say you're shooting a wedding, or you have another photo shoot and somebody has a really bad sunburn, and even worse than that, they have raccoon eyes where they were maybe skiing, or they had their sunglasses on and they got really burnt, and so their eyes are white and their face is red. This is a great tool. The HSL and color tool is great for trying to compensate for that. But right now, I'm just gonna walk you through how I like to set up my colors. I like to go into hue, and again, if somebody's face is red or orange, you can edit it right here. If your sky is blue, but not blue enough, you can kind of change the hue and color right here. But right now, I'm actually gonna focus on the yellows. Once again, we shoot in Kelvin, and so we tend to retain a lot more yellows and warmth in our images. I like to bring those down to this pink zone. You can see the trees in the background changing color, so see how they're green? And now they're kind of turning to a red-orange. They actually look kind of dead, so I'm not gonna go that far, but say I go the other direction, they're gonna look really green. That looks a little bizarre. It looks like the middle of summer and it just snowed. So just for the overall wintry vibe, I'm gonna go somewhere in the middle between maybe around, maybe not middle, but somewhere around -35. So I can have a little bit of that pink hue just to add to sunset, but I can also retain the greens and the warmth. So that's one of my favorite tools. Luminance is also absolutely one of my favorites. If you need your subject to pop, this is a great opportunity to make them pop without dodging and burning, and just kind of seeing what you can accomplish in Lightroom. Their skin tone, most people's skin tone in camera, is typically some shade of orange or yellow. So I like coming into orange, and I'm gonna bump that up. You can see their faces getting really dark and really bright. So I'm gonna hover around maybe +20. I'm gonna check on yellow and see what that does. So that's gonna mess with the background. Here is completely brought down to the lowest luminance you can. Here's the highest. So this is fun for trees, especially in the fall in Colorado when we get lots of aspens. It's fun to go through and just kind of very specifically pick which color you want to make darker or brighter. Also, red, I'm just gonna brighten the red just a little bit, because again, their faces have some red in it, so I'm gonna bring it up to +20. And that's good for right there. I probably won't touch this too much more. However, I do have blue in the snow. It's not my favorite. I also don't like yellow in the snow. Who wants yellow snow in their photos? So I'm just for fun gonna remove all the blues and see what that looks like. I know that Jason had a blue shirt on, and so it actually didn't remove many of the blues at all, but you can see the snow if I bump it up to 100, it's super blue. If I bring it down to -100, it is white, crisp snow. So I'm gonna probably do around -80 just so I can keep any little bit of blues that might be in their clothing. This is also great for weddings. If you're shooting a wedding or any shoot where your subject is wearing white, if it tends to have a blue hue, that is super easy to get rid of right here. Just get rid of the blue. Now down here, the color grading, this is where editing gets really fun, and this is where you can really put your twist and your personal style on the images. I am going to actually start with highlights, and what we're going to do with the highlights, so these are just a little different from up above what we were working on. So what we're gonna do is, I'll show you, it's much easier to show you than to try to explain it, is I'm going to drag drag this circle from the center of the circle, and I'm going to start spinning it. Now these are the highlights, so this is going to change the color and tone of the snow and their skin. That's what these highlights are for. I tend to hover somewhere around this area, the oranges and yellows, because I want to add a little bit of warmth into their faces. So if you're closer to the center, it's not going to be very obvious. If you go all the way out to the edge, you will see how it drastically changes the look of those highlights. I'm going to stick pretty close to the center because I don't want anything overly dramatic. I tend to like pretty well how my images look when they're straight out of the camera. So I'm just going to change just a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of warmth into their skin. And then down here, you can actually change the intensity of it. So if I brighten it up or lessen it, you can see how it's changing only my highlights. So I'm actually going to brighten it a bit because there's a lot of footprints in the background. This will help kind of hide the footprints without blowing out the image. And I feel good about that. Shadows, I typically, since I do shoot so warm in that Kelvin, I actually like to add a little bit of blue back in. However, for these, I'm kind of digging the orange a little bit. Yep, I like the orange-red area. So I'm going to stick there. Again, I'm going to stay pretty close to the center because I don't want it to be super dramatic coming out here. That is a total personal preference for you to decide. So I've got some, actually I'm going to do a little bit of green. I lied. I'm going to do some green here. I like the green. Yep. And then from here, you can change the intensity of your grays. This is where if you prefer to have like more of that muted look and you don't like it as contrasted, this is a great spot to really make that magic happen. So I feel pretty good about the direction of this. The blending, again, this is just something I like to play with, see which color area, which side I like best. I'm gonna go with like plus 50, or you know what, not plus 50. I'm gonna go with 68 on this. And then balance, this is just going to be a kind of a tint balance, I guess, but I like it somewhere around 40. Yay, perfect. This is coming together. Down here, detail, I will do typically like a 10% noise reduction. That just kind of softens my subjects. It's not anything you have to do. Vignette, I'm not a huge fan of Vignette. It's like, I am, but not in the winter because you can see it makes the snow white, or sorry, the snow black. So I'm just gonna leave it. I love this image. However, I really want them to pop just a little more. I also really want to get rid of this rock down here. So let's get rid of the rock first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this brush up here, and I'm going to, that size is actually perfect, but say I wanted to adjust the size, you can go bigger, itty bitty. For this size, I'm going to stick around 70. I want my opacity at 100 because I want this rock completely removed. I'm going to click on it, and it's going to say, hey, you want to grab some snow from over here? I'm going to say, nah, because there's a little bit of grass. Let's go up here and grab some snow. You guys, you can go crazy with this. I'm just going to color a whole bunch of footprints so you can see how crazy you can get with it to try to remove a whole bunch of stuff from your images. I'm going to come over here. I'll get maybe a couple of these. Footprints in the snow should not bother me as much as they do, so we'll just be done. Now we're going to go ahead and brighten them up a bit just to make them pop from the background. This is Lightroom's version of dodging and burning. If you come from a Photoshop background, dodging and burning is wonderful, but this is Lightroom's version of dodging and burning. It's the paintbrush tool. You don't have layers. So that's, I think coming from a Photoshop background, it's pretty frustrating to not have layers, but it's so much faster, so much easier to use it in this way. So I'm just resetting all my settings just so you guys can see what it looks like from the beginning. Double click on all these, get them back to 0 and 0. So with this brush tool, that brush is a little big, so I'm going to come down here to size and I'm going to bring it down. So what I'm going to do is you guys won't be able to see anything if I don't change the adjustment. So I want them to be brighter. Instead of doing the exposure and just brightening them up, I'm actually going to lower my blacks because it's going to reduce some of those shadows without it being obvious that I highlighted them. And then I'm going to bump up my whites just a little bit. Let's go to like 10 and see how that looks. So now you guys can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm just dragging and painting them. You can't see a whole lot. And actually, I messed up. I went the wrong direction for the blacks. So I'm gonna come, actually, I meant to do positive 15. Whoa, you can see that adjustment. So I'm gonna do positive 15. You guys can see how, I'm gonna go ahead and delete that, just so you can see me actually painting it and see it working properly. So now I'm going to paint them now that I have my blacks at a positive, so I'm getting rid of some of the blacks, and I'm gonna paint Patty as well. So it looks good, but I would love for them to be just a little brighter. And actually, I'm gonna paint their shirt too. So I'm on the same paintbrush. Basically just pretend like you just dipped your paintbrush in like blue, or I guess red, because it's gonna show us a red mask. Pretend like you painted your paintbrush in red and you just want everything to be red. So you can see if I hover over this, it's going to show you everything that I painted in red and everything that's going to be adjusted from this area. So I'm going to go ahead and do exposure now. See if I bring it up to a lot. Ooh, gross. Bring it down too much. Ew, gross. So I'm actually just going to bring it up just a hair. I'm just going to do 0.10. I think that looks perfect. So I'm going to click done, but say now I want to burn the background. All I have to do is click on that paintbrush and I have a new paintbrush. If I want to go back and re-edit it and I go, you know what, that just looks too fake, I click on that paintbrush, or this little button is technically the paintbrush, and I can readjust everything again. However, I'm actually just going to burn the background just a little bit. So I'm going to click on that paintbrush. I already have a new paintbrush. However, it's going to keep the same settings that I did for this paintbrush. So I'm going to go ahead, reset these back to 0. And for burning, I'm fine just bringing the exposure down a bit. And I'm actually going to bring my brush size up quite a bit because I need to cover a little more. So I'm going to paint these trees behind them. There we go. I might make this brush a little smaller just to get in between their heads. I don't want to get too wild because I don't want it to be obvious that I dodged and burned on them, and if there's a pretty clear separation, then it'll be obvious I went through and dodged and burned. So again, you can do exposure, you can play with shadows, you could bring the shadows down if you just wanted it to be a little darker, a little more poppy. And I might bring the whites up just a little bit just to bring in that sunset in the background. You could also do temperature. So say I want to make this a little warmer, which I do, but I don't want their faces to be warmer. This is a great opportunity to just use this paintbrush. So pretend like with this new paintbrush, now I've dipped everything in yellow instead of red, and I am just painting everything yellow in the background. I love that. I think that's pretty perfect. Now it seems like a really long time to edit an image, but typically I would never take that long. I would just go through much quicker, but for teaching's sake, for you know, education's sake, it took quite a bit longer than I expected. So anyway, this image is done. I love it. It's warm, and I hope you guys benefited from that. We are going to move over to fully exposed in the mountains at sunset. So you guys can see Patty has a little bit of sun coming in on her hair. If I'm looking at them, and this is 12 o'clock, the sun I actually had at about 10 o'clock. I'm at 6 o'clock, the mountain is at 12 o'clock, the sun is at 10 o'clock. So you can see it's coming in and beautifully casting this glow around Harry's golden locks, the side of Jason's face, and the side of Patty's hair, making it just have that beautiful sunset glow. So for this one, I'm actually going to see what winter sunset looks like. That is much greener than I would, as far as the tint goes, much greener than I would like. I'm going to click on golden winter sunset. That one's good, lots of contrast. And again, ooh, that one's pretty perfect. None of these are going to be perfect. Once you click on it, you're still going to have to do some tweaking and work. I love actually the TJP Sunset 2021. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to bring up the pinks again because I just feel like there's a little too much green, but now the pinks look funny. So I'm actually going to put that back to where it was, which was at -3. And I'm going to come down here and show you guys this is why it looks so green, because I had adjusted the shadows way too much. So I'm going to pull that back closer to the center. This is at 0. This is with a little bit of green added. I do like a little bit of the green just to break up some of the warmth, but that's perfect. I prefer that. And I might brighten up the shadows just a little bit. You can't tell a whole lot, but I'm gonna do it just a little bit. Once you've edited for so long, you just see things you wish you couldn't see. Like there's 2% too much magenta in this image, and there is 1% too much contrast in this. So you can kind of get down a deep rabbit hole, but for time's sake, I'm gonna go through and just make these adjustments quickly. If I go into hue, you can see that I have quite a bit of pink in this image because I didn't want things to look so dead in the background. We have a lot of dead trees. We do have a lot of evergreens though living in Colorado. So I wanted a little bit of pink and orange added back in. If I go to 0, go to 0. It still looks nice, but for me personally, I just like having things a little more on the pink side so things don't look so dead in the background. Noise reduction's at 10, which is automatic with the action. And I'm going to crop them in the center, mostly because I don't want to lose a whole lot of this mountain. And if I cropped them over here, I'm going to lose that whole mountain. Now they can they can change the crop if they prefer. Obviously they can crop heavy left or heavy right. This was a branding session. It was a family branding session for their new business. And so they are welcome to, change the image however they want for what they need it for. If they need to put text on it, they might want it cropped heavy left or heavy right. But for saving the mountain, I'm going to put them right in the center. I really love this. I'm going to go through and paint them. And it's actually set for what the trees were set out. So I'm going to put that at 0. Again, I'm going to bring my blacks up. I might just do 10. I'm going to bring my whites up just by 10. And I'm going to paint them. That is perfect. Just a little bit and paint Harry's face, obviously. Perfect. And I might brighten it up just a little bit with the shadows just because that sun is coming in from the side. So there's going to be a dark side of their face. It's not obvious in this image just because it was properly exposed. But I love that. I love that image. I love the look of it. I love the warmth. And again, that is because we tend to shoot quite warm in Kelvin. We're going to move over to this image, and I'm actually going to show you guys how to edit this out. So this is the altar that my husband built for our wedding. It gets so windy where we live that this altar just like toppled over. So I'm going to show you guys how to edit that. Right now though, I'm going to edit the image first. So I'm going to brighten this up because I know I need it brighter. This image is way more blue than I would ever typically edit in. But again, because we have a new camera, I'm still learning the settings and how different it is. We're shooting with D750s, the Nikon D750. Loved it. It's an amazing, amazing camera, but we did end up switching to the mirrorless family. But with the 750, I loved shooting at 10,000 Kelvin. It just, oh my gosh, I cried, literally cried the first time I looked at my camera. When it was 10,000 Kelvin, because it was just gorgeous. It retained the color beautifully. I just loved it. But for now, I do have to add some warmth back into this image because it was quite cool. The sun had gone down for the most part. It was right at the edge of those mountains. I'm going to add a little bit of pink in as well, or sorry, magenta. Maybe not that much, maybe 4. You can see how you could get very picky with this. I'm going to keep that around 9,000. For the warmth, but I just know that once that sun gets to about here on the mountains, like right at the edge of setting, I need to bump up my Kelvin to between 9,000 and 12,000, depending on if it's blue hour or what time of the day it is. Bump up my clarity a bit. I'm going to bump up the exposure just a little more. Again, I tend to underexpose when I'm shooting. Since Harry is yellow, I'm going to make him just have a little more pink hue. The vibrance. We have not talked about the vibrance yet. I love vibrance. I never touch saturation. I will always use vibrance. Vibrance, that's too much, but vibrance is way more subtle so that an image doesn't look edited. Whereas saturation is like, ooh, it looks like he just rolled in mustard. I do not like saturation. I don't touch it if I have the option, which I always have the option. So love this image. I love the colors. I'm going to paint Harry just a little bit just to bring out his adorable face. And now we're going to move over to removing this. I'm gonna try to do it here in Lightroom. However, this is one of those rare times that I really love to open Photoshop. If I have a big object that I need to remove, I would much prefer to open Photoshop to do this. Also, Jason has part of the legs right behind him, so I may actually end up opening this in Photoshop eventually, but let's see what we can do in Lightroom. We're going to use this brush. It's like it's a clone brush or a healing brush. You can choose which you want, if you want to heal the image or if you want to clone the image, or clone what it is that you're working on. So I'm going to do a bigger size. I need a much bigger size for this. Opacity's at 100. I'm going to stick with healing and see what that does. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag over what I want to remove, which is this whole thing. Then it's going to say, hey, you want it to come from here? No, I don't want another Harry, even though he's adorable. So I'm actually going to drag it over to this side of my image. And you can see if I get too close to the edge of the photo, it's going to show a really sharp line right here where it cuts off at the edge of the photo. So you're literally just dragging this to where you want to replace from. That is actually not all that bad. It is not super obvious. You guys know because you just watched me edit it, but I'm going to move this just a little bit. Right? I think that might be good. I'm going to click done. That looks great. I think that looks great. If I were to deliver this, no one would ever know, which I'm going to deliver. I'm going to crop it just a little. No one would ever know that there was a huge, massive wood structure right here. Now the one behind Jason is going to be a little more complicated just because I would, again, go into Photoshop and cut him out and edit around it. Let's just try, though. I'm going to clone, actually, because I want a sharper edge around this. I'm going to lower my brush a little bit to make it smaller. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to try to trace Jason as best as I can. I'm going to get that wood out of there and go around his shirt. Okay, so let's see what this does. This is going to take it from down here. It's clone. So you can see it's a very, very sharp edges. I don't love that. I'm going to drag it as close as I can to where we're working. So I'm actually going to go to heal and see what that looks like. Ugh. See, this is why I don't like the heal, because it actually creates way too much of an edge where it bleeds out, and even adjusting the feather isn't going to do anything. So I'm going to go back to clone and see what I can do. I'm going to see if I can work on the edge a little bit. That's what the feathering tool is. It just kind of manipulates the edges a little bit so it's not as sharp. That's actually working quite a bit better than I expected. Again, if I have the time and it's obvious enough, I will open this in Photoshop. The edges, I'm going to actually paint the edges of this just a little bit just to get it to blend a little better. Again, it just automatically thinks it knows what to do. So you have to tell it where you want it to go and where you want to take the information from. That looks pretty good, actually. I'm pretty stoked about that. Now there's a little bit of a lip up here where you can tell something may have happened, but I don't think anybody who did not see the original image is going to notice at all. So I'm actually going to just heal that because it doesn't have to be very specific. I love that. I am actually going to edit just this a little bit so I don't have repeating patterns there and there. So I'm going to edit that out. I might edit these little footprints out, just personal preference, no reason other than personal preference. And I feel really good about that. I would be happy delivering this. Again, you guys know that I edited over here, but this just looks like footprints now, and no one else would know. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys loved looking at Harry's adorable face. If you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comments of this video. Feel free to share it. But thank you guys so much for being here for this, and I hope you have an awesome day. I will see you in the next video.